Thank you. Hopefully the noise is adequate. You're cool? Okay. And as Enoch said, it'll be online sometime, and I've got tons of things online. But getting the Constitution online, I hope we don't have a new one before that happens. There's a real movement right now to rewrite and abandon our existing Constitution. And there are people, many of them, that claim to love the Constitution are the principal movers and shakers in this particular environment. So it's a big problem. And I spoke about a week ago to a group of people that claimed to love the Constitution, but as soon as we got there, their interests were with people that wanted to get rid of it and start over again. And so even people, not maybe even, mostly people that claim to love it are at the basis of these problems. And so we're going to talk about the Article 5, and it is the amendment process, how you change the Constitution. And we take the right of the people to alter or abolish their government from the Declaration of Independence. So we're going to look at some of these things, and these are fundamental truths that are God-given. All of us have the right to self-governance, really, truly. And that was the intention of God, and the Founding Fathers captured that. So Article 5 retained that right to be able to have the type of government that was most applicable to us. So let's go back to the Declaration of Independence, and I'll maybe pause and parenthetically make comments as we're going through. And so we're not going to just read it and buzz on. But there's self-evident truths out there. We've talked about this before. All men are created equal, and they're endowed by their Creator, so there's a God, with certain inalienable rights. Among these, they mention a few. And then they say that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Isn't that interesting? When our legislature gets together, they feel like they've got a whole bunch of things they got to do. And if you ever asked a legislator, unless they've probably recently talked to someone like me, you say, what do you guys do? Oh, we've got all these demands. I mean, so many things that need to be done, and they all take money. And, well, we get money in, but we do the best we can to divide it up appropriately and everything. Blah, 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 blah. What is the fundamental purpose of government? To secure God-given rights. Right out of the most fundamental document we have in this nation. It is to secure these God-given rights. So, governments are instituted for that purpose. If they have to do other things and they have to spend money, well, it better be to that end, ultimately and finally. So they derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. That doesn't mean that every time we have an election that we suddenly say, hey, we got a whole bunch of new tyrants in here that can do whatever they darn well please. No. That governed consent is given at the ratification of the fundamental document, the Constitution. We'll talk a little bit about that as we go through this. So we gave our consent to be governed with the ratification of the Constitution. Those that hold office govern within the limits and bounds that document establishes. That's what they're supposed to do. They usually don't, but that's what they take an oath to do. They take an oath before God, that they will uphold those things and abide by those limited and bounded things within the Constitution. Okay, so governments have a purpose to preserve God-given rights. We create governments for that, and they get the ability to govern when we give our consent. Let's move on for a little bit. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such a form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Whoa. People have a right to change their government. Oh, man. Yeah, it's true. That's exactly what the American founders were doing in 1776. they said, okay, it's time to alter or abolish this government that we're in. That we retain that right. That right did not go away when the Constitution was established. And it's interesting to me that when they wrote the Constitution, they specifically noted that they retained that right. Okay, they didn't just say, oh, King's X, never ever again can you alter or abolish your government. It is a fact that this is one of our God-given rights. Going on, prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. Now, all of these things are weaving in, hopefully, and you'll be able to say, oh, I know why we talked about that at the beginning as we go forward. Because there are those that say we need to change for light and transient causes. And they're most frivolously wheedling out from underneath the people the foundation of their nation by doing these things. So all of these things are pertinent to what we're going to be speaking about in this little get-together, okay? So kind of collate them, tuck them away. I don't know what you need to do, but when something goes, oh, there, it applies, just bring it back out and attach a paper clip to it or something, and just remember that you'll go back and reference that at some future date. There are many today, and we're going to talk at the end of this little presentation about how highly organized, cleverly disguised, and powerfully promoted this effort currently is. It has got legs more than we can possibly imagine. And I used a little analogy at the end talking about the Tet Offensive from 1968. And a lot of people, what? It was the Chinese New Year, and the communists threw a big, big offensive, bigger than anybody in the American hierarchy thought they were capable of. And it was, all time on target stuff. This was stuff that was meticulously planned. Meticulously, the logistics were put in place and meticulously executed. And it caught the American hierarchy. Some people, boots on the ground that had their ear on the ground too, figured it was coming. But the fact of the matter is, total surprise. It was a big bloodbath to straighten it out, okay? But that's what's happening with the effort to change our Constitution. It's coming out of the woods, kids. We'll see a picture or two of that when we get to the end of this thing. Okay, so these people that are doing this, I've identified 10 delusions. We could have put 50 or 26 or something, but 10, that's always a nice number, 10 commandments, so we go with 10, right? Okay, so they have delusions. We'll talk about delusions and what they are in a minute, but they call it a convention of the states, or an Article 5 convention, or an amendments convention, or a conference of states. They use all sorts of different names, appellations, denominations, what do you want to call it. They use these things to obfuscate the very central truth of it is it's a convention to change our Constitution. And some of them are supposed to be a little less dangerous or not, they are, but we'll talk about that, okay? But these people, regardless of the term they use, we're going to find out that it has the same effect, in spite of what they'll try and trick you into believing. Here's what George Washington said at the end of his administration as President of the United States. It served 8 years. It was time to move on and pass on the baton, if you will. And he offered counsel as a loving friend of the nation. He had been first in war, first in peace, first in the hearts of his countrymen. That's how they eulogized him. But he truly was the indispensable man. We could not have had this pulled off without this mortal man. Of course, the Savior and God and all that kind of help. Yeah, well, I'll give them all the credit. But Washington was the instrument, and he was amazing. And he, every step of the way, everything that he fulfilled was just an amazing exercise of elegant leadership. He deprecated himself. Yeah, I'm not worthy. I can't do this. I'm not as good as these other guys. All this kind of stuff. He was very humble about it. He could cuss up a storm too when he got aggravated. I mean, so don't think he was a perfect, perfect in every respect, I guess we could say. But this pertains to what we're talking about, this get-together. he wrote in his farewell address, "This government, the offspring of our own choice, uninfluenced and unawed, adopted upon its full investigation and mature deliberation, completely free in its principles and in distribution of its powers, uniting security with energy, and some of these underlying things I want you to pay particular attention, containing within itself a provision for its own amendment." See, this wasn't an ironclad thing that you could never scoop out from underneath if you needed to. We'll see how they intended that to be. By the way, when I present these slides with some kind of dialogue, it's a learning modality. We can see, or we can hear, or we can do both, or we can do those and do too. I can't do doing here. But I can have you see and I can have you hear. So that's why it kind of collates it into your mind. Has a claim of your confidence and your support, respect for its authority, compliance with its laws, acquiescence in its measures are duties enjoined by the fundamental maxims of true liberty. The basis of our political systems is the right of the people to make and alter their constitutions of government. There it is again. They're hearkening back to that fundamental document. People think that the Declaration of Independence, it's a one-off deal and we move down the road, you know? Then we get, oh yeah, we got to establish the government, whatever. No, it set a foundation, it set a pattern, it set the rules of engagement. So we keep coming back to it. It's the right of the people to make and alter their constitution of government. But the Constitution, which at any time exists till changed by an explicit and authentic act of the whole people, is sacredly obligatory upon all. We're going to see a slide here in a minute whereby legislative enactment and judicial review, they have changed our Constitution to be almost 3,000 pages long. And that's wrong, because you'll see as we read the Article 5, it does not allow anybody to change it by guess or by golly or by legislative enactment or by judicial review. It is what it is, it says what it says, and it is only that. We'll get to that. I keep kind of overhanging the market a little bit, but hopefully you'll see, oh, there it is. Oh, I see that now. Okay, so there's method to the madness. Okay, going on in his farewell address, toward the preservation of your government and the permanency of your present happy state, it is requisite not only that you steadily discountenance irregular oppositions to its acknowledged authority, but also that you resist with care the spirit of innovation upon its principles, however specious the pretext. Oh, we got a great idea, we got to do this, and it's going to be best. You guys will be happy with it. No, he says resist. Specious pretext. They don't make there's no right to do that. One method of assault may be to effect in the forms of the Constitution alterations which will impair the energy of the system and thus to undermine what cannot be directly overthrown. The first time I ran, and I can't take too many side trips because you know it will delay the evening, but I was at a booth at a big community celebration for the 4th of July. I had a tent booth on Main Street and there was thousands and thousands of people. There was parades and fireworks stuff was going to be on that evening, big shows and all that kind of stuff. And a guy that was probably about my age now came by to see me and my age then. and he says, well, what's your platform? Pulled out a Constitution. I says, this is my platform. So if it ain't in there, it ain't in my platform. If it's there, it is in my platform. He says, oh, I love the Constitution. And this was back during the turmoil of Iraq and all that kind of stuff, and Afghanistan. The what?
First or second?
Well, yeah, this was the second one. Okay, that's a good point. So anyway, I says, oh, then you'll enjoy my position on war. So what do you mean? I says, well, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11. It says, Congress shall have power to declare war. Oh, well, the president had to declare it. I said, well, but it violates the Constitution. He said, oh, he just had to. We've just got to let things like that happen. And our conversation degraded from there, okay? But the fact of the matter is, I said to him, okay, now let's see. In your opinion, it's okay to violate the Constitution for this. And someone else comes along and says, well, this aspect of the Constitution could be violated because I think it's a good idea, and this couldn't be violated because of this idea. And pretty soon we just got an opinion, and opinions are like noses. Almost everybody has one, okay? And oh man, he was mad by the time he walked away and he didn't vote for me. For I offend more people when I have these little get-togethers than I can shake a stick at. So he says, just don't change it by yes and by golly, for crying out loud. That's what Washington said, without quite the emphatic emphasis that I put in there. He goes on to say, it is important likewise that the habits of thinking in a free country should inspire caution in those entrusted with its administration to confine themselves within their respective constitutional spheres, avoiding in the exercise of the powers of one department to encroach upon another, like the executive, creating law, which is that's the purview of the legislative, right? Never happens today, right? The spirit of encroachment tends to consolidate the powers of all the departments in one, and thus to create whatever the form of government, a real despotism. So you bring them together, and yeah, this 47th Federalist paper says that that's the very definition of tyranny, okay? Okay, if in the opinion of the people, the distribution or modification of the constitutional powers be in any particular wrong, you might note that I emphasized, underlined, italicized, bolded that. And this is wherein we find a great deal, probably virtually all of the people that are looking to change the Constitution, invariably I'll say to them, what's wrong with it? Oh, everything's wrong. No, I want specifics. Tell me what's wrong with it. Oh, we have a horrible budget deficit. Well, now tell me where in the Constitution that's allowed. Well, yeah, but it is doing it. Well, no, just a minute. I just heard an ad when we were coming down about somebody that's going to do a Constitution amendment for a balanced budget amendment. I mean, they're running for office right now as we speak. For years, I collected every single proposed balanced budget amendment that I could find. I have a file somewhere, but we're packing to move, we think. And I don't know where it is right this minute, or I would have brought it. But in this thick file of proposed balanced budget amendments, and you'd be shocked how many often come in a given legislative session. And it usually takes me about a nanosecond, and that's a little bit of an overstatement, but about a nanosecond to determine how I would find a way around that balanced budget amendment to keep us in a deficit mode. And they're so easy to find. And even some really soundly founded constitutional people that I respect greatly have always got the right idea to do it. And I always say, well, but what about? And then they want to put some more words in. I've found people that have amendments that are several pages long, typed. I say, man. So a good amendment is made better by length? I mean, come on, people. So anyway, that idea of it should be wrong if we're going to change it. But if you can't come up with the wrong, what are you going to change? And they never can come up with it. They have never once in all the years I've been doing this come up with a wrong. Oh, we have people in office too long. Is that the Constitution's fault or is it the voters' fault? And anyway, let's move on from that. I could spend a lot of time on that. But if it's in a particular wrong, let it be corrected by an amendment in the way which the Constitution designates. He's saying, don't do it by guess or by golly, by a legislative enactment, by a court decree. Change it the way Article 5 says to do it. We're going to read Article 5 in about a moment, okay? Mere moments, let's put it that way. But let there be no change by usurpation, for though this in one instance may be the instrument of good, it is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. Okay, so this guy that came past my booth many years ago and said, president has to declare war sometimes. Heck no. Okay, I'd say it more emphatically, but we've got a mixed audience here. Okay, no, it can't be. If we do, we lose the fundamental foundation of the nation's government. Okay, so here's Article 5. I said we'd get to it. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution. Now, that's the only way we've ever done an amendment, by the way. Proposed amendments come through 2/3 of both houses. Think of the Bill of Rights. They had this situation where they said, we'll give you a Bill of Rights if you guys send some ideas in and we'll mull them over, we'll collate them and put them together and we'll see what we can do with it. So of the 17 amendments that made it to that point, because there was a lot of duplication and they had to kind of, okay, there's something about right to keep and bear arms, there's something about guns, and there's something about, so let's put them all into one thing that says what it says. There's freedom of speech and press and religion. All yeah, okay, we'll put that here. By the way, there were 17 that made it to that point. Okay, and 5 of those, they said, heck no, we ain't going to do this. This is bad. And if you had my book, we could talk about that at length, and that isn't the purpose of this get-together. But there were some things that were rejected because it did what, in effect, the 14th Amendment has done since. In 1868, when that got ramrodded through by the scoundrels that were in power. And it really messed up the dynamic that was there about the separation of powers between government, national government, general government, and states. Another discussion perhaps sometime. But the point of the matter is, there were some like that. But there were 12 that the 2/3 of both houses said, it's okay. So in September of 1789, 2/3 of both houses passed those 12 amendments, proposed amendments, then sent them out for ratification. By the middle of December 1791, 10 of them had been ratified. And they collated those 10. By the way, the first 2 were not ratified. The others were. So they were really, and you'll see in a little while, something I parenthetically put the 10th Amendment in because it would have been the 12th Amendment. And you're tracking with this. If you don't do the first 2, they start numbering from 1, which was really going to be the 3rd. Okay. Anyway, so what happened was by December 15th, 1791, they ratified these 10 amendments. 200 years later, one of them was ratified again. One of those 10 didn't have an expiration date. And there's still one out there floating around. If it gets ratified, we're going to have a really big House of Representatives. That's another discussion. So but that's the only way we've ever done. All the 27 amendments we've ever had came by 2/3 of both houses, passing them, sending them out for ratification, and then we're going to hear how 3/4 of the states have to ratify them. Okay. So 2/3 of both houses deemed necessary proposed amendments on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the states shall call a convention. Okay, so if we get to the point that the states are saying we really do need to make some changes, 2/3 of the states have to say we want to call a convention. All they can do is apply. I can't overemphasize that. We're going to talk about that several times as we go forward. They apply to the Congress, and then Congress calls a convention. And then the states meet in a convention, and that's what these people that are out there nowadays are trying to get to happen. Utah's made 2 calls for the convention that still currently stand. We defeated it in Idaho this year, and New York, because of some shenanigans that the people were trying to do, they were trying to say, see, New York called for a convention from 1789 forward. They had a lot of conventions they've tried to call, but New York could see what these guys were trying to do. They were trying to just collate to get the 2/3 number. They were saying, let's go out and gather all of these calls for a convention, even though it's a couple hundred years ago, and we're going to get our 2/3 states asking for it. New York said, over our dead body. This would be really stupid. So New York this year rescinded every single call for a convention, and they walked away from it. And we're going, woo-woo. It's wonderful. Okay, so, I celebrate little victories wherever we can get them. Okay, so the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states shall call a convention for proposed amendments, which in either case shall be valid in all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the other several states, or by conventions in 3/4 thereof. as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress. Okay, so there's a couple of things in that long sentence. So they either go to be out to be, okay, so 3/4 have got to ratify. They always say to me, Bradley, you are such a worrywart. 3/4 of the states have got to think it's okay. What do you think? 3/4 of the states are going to be tricked? Yeah. Yeah, really. Yeah. Okay, listen to this, guys. You ever heard of the 14th Amendment? Yeah, you have. Of course you have. And this isn't the purpose to talk about that scurrilous, venom-penned document. But if you ever read, I know every night before you go to sleep, you get out a Supreme Court decision that was made some years back, and you read it in order to help you sleep. Dite v. Turner is the name of this decision made by the Utah Supreme Court in 1968. It's a very inane Supreme Court decision. But we had some people on the Supreme Court at that time which were really ticked off about the 14th Amendment. They felt that the general government, the federal government, was just hammering things down our throats, and they were really mad. And so they reviewed the ratification process of the 14th Amendment. It was a scandalous, scurrilous, horrific act of tyranny. The radical Republicans in 1868 had full control. And by golly, they were going to get that 14th Amendment. And just think about the 13th Amendment. It happened before the 14th Amendment, right? Yeah, it did, I think. The southern states that had been reincorporated into the states, they ratified it. What did the 13th Amendment do? It got rid of slavery. But this 14th Amendment, absolutely, it was tyranny in venomous ink. And the southern states are going, wait. You're gonna abuse this now? We're done with this thing. And so what they did is they excommunicated, so to speak, the states that had already been brought back into the Union, would not let them participate. They removed them from Congress so that changed the dynamic of how many had to be voting in favor of it, because the other guys wouldn't be voting against it. They did that, and they would not let the states debate it, discuss it, or withhold ratification. You guys are not part of this union. Some of the states that had never been out of the union, they had said, we want the 14th. No, wait, I see what's happening, and they withdrew their approval. And so they got booted. It was the Dite v. Turner is the 1968 Utah Supreme Court decision that outlines this. It is absolutely scandalous. They were going to have that amendment. Well, you look at the 16th Amendment, for example, the income tax. You look at the 17th Amendment that destroyed the dynamic of the states having a position at the general government level with the states appointing the senators. The 18th Amendment, prohibition. I mean, these all got ratified by so-called 3/4 of the states. They were stupid, bad decisions. And it all happened in 1913, on those that I just mentioned. And they had a lot better understanding of constitutional issues than Americans in general do now. But they ratified them anyway. And we're still suffering of them 111 years later. So people always say to me, 3/4 of the states. Yeah, you can fool some of the people some of the time, and all of the people some of the time, and all of the people most of the time. That's not how it goes, you know. But that's what's happening in America today. Most of us are being bamboozled by, right now we got the election process going. And this is not an exact one I've seen right now, but if you see a politician wandering around the pasture, gazing at the clouds with a flag waving in his background and this patriotic music going, you know this guy can't be trusted. You don't wander around a pasture looking at the sky. You watch where you're putting your feet, okay? This guy doesn't know when he's going to step in something and when he's not. Okay, but that's us getting bamboozled. So, but 3/4, that's quite a bump you got to go over to get this ratified. I always say, could they change that in a convention? What do you mean? Well, that's exactly what happened in the first Constitution Convention in 1787. the existing Constitution required, which they'd just been called there to amend, which they wrote a whole new Constitution, set it aside, brushed it out of the way, and they said you can ratify this with 9 states instead of 13. Because the existing Constitution, the article said you had to have 100% of the states. So they changed the ratification process. We're gonna hit on these a few times as we go through, but just keep watching for these things, because we get fooled a lot of the time by overlooking things. Okay, so I say, and I believe correctly, because it's the only convention we've had that's similar to what they're trying to propose. They did it, 1787. They changed the ratification process from 100% to 9 states. What if it said, we're going to do like Iraq, and you go out and you vote and you get a purple finger? You remember that when they did the Iraq Constitution? That's a democratic way. Or what if we say we do a call-in poll on 900 numbers? I mean, whatever. What if we say Congress ratifies this with a vote of majority vote in Congress, House or Senate? What if they say 26 states ratify it, it's passed? They could change it. I mean, and those are just a few that come to mind here. Okay, so when ratified, by the legislatures in the middle of the three-fourths of the several states, or by conventions, the 3/4 thereof. Give you an example. We mentioned the 18th Amendment as being a really bad amendment. Most people don't even know it has to do with alcohol consumption. Really bad, a really bad thing to put in the Constitution. You may be totally against alcohol, you may be totally for it, but you don't write it into a Constitution. It's not a good approach. But they, at the behest of a lot of celebrities, prohibited alcohol with the 18th Amendment. And they put it into effect. Well, pretty soon we had Elliot Ness and the boys running around breaking up kegs of beer and stuff like that. But the fact of the matter is, it was everybody became a scofflaw. Not everybody, maybe not you or me, but everybody in essence in America became a scofflaw. They were violating this law. It was a bad law, and it was causing a whole bunch of egregious things by law enforcement throughout the nation. Cost a lot of money, was more grief than you could understand. So they said, we got to get rid of this. Well, how do we do it? Well, they proposed by 2/3 of both houses. We didn't call a convention. We called together both houses and said, let's get rid of prohibition. And they passed in both houses, 2/3, the 21st Amendment, sent it out for ratified. But why do I bring that up right now? So it's either 3/4 of the states in their legislatures, or by conventions in 3/4. Well, the big concern, and they really, really, really wanted this new amendment that got rid of the 18th Amendment. So they said, nope, blasted state of Utah, they'll never get rid of this thing. We're going to call a convention instead of sending it to the state legislatures. So all of the state legislatures across the whole nation were left out of this decision. Conventions were called in every state in the Union, including Utah, and they stacked the deck in that convention to make sure it passed. Now, I'm glad they did. I mean, you know, it's a scurrilous, kind of underhanded thing to do, but it still was a bad amendment to begin with. But that's how by guess and by golly, they're going to get it passed if they choose. 16th Amendment has a very questionable ratification process. 17th Amendment's too. Dang it. Every time I say something, I come to another thought. Okay, the 17th Amendment to change the way that senators came into office is specifically prohibited in the Constitution. 17th Amendment violates the Constitution. Well, how can it do that? It changed the Constitution, so it's in. No. Specifically, and we'll read this at the very end of this. Well, let me just read it right now. No state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the state. In the Senate. Okay. Well, yeah, but each state still gets 2 senators. No. The state legislators chose the senators until the 17th Amendment. Now we choose them as glorified members of the House of Representatives. Remember, the 39th Federalist paper talked about the fact that the House got its power from the people, direct election. The Senate got its power from the states, direct appointment. And we've talked about the Electoral College, and we'll do more if you want sometime, but that was a very compound process that thought both about the states and the population and did it in a way that kept them from being captured by either the people or the states or the legislature or anything. Separation of powers includes separation of sources of powers. But this 17th Amendment changed that dynamic and made it the people gave the power to the Senate. The states no longer have a seat at the table. And in this specifically, read that last couple of lines again, this amendment specifically prohibits changing that. It says, okay, we're going to keep that off the table. You can't do that. Okay, so the 17th Amendment violates the Constitution, and we can explain that in more detail if you want sometime. But the fact of the matter is, by guess and by golly, by hook or by crook, they're going to get amendments through if they want it. And these three-quarter state things are just not, they're not bulletproof. Yeah, it does to some degree, and it was the best they could go. Yes, ma'am.
Is that there's people in office that follow laws for the people and does not need to be amended or anything. They can pass whatever they want. And there's nothing stopping them. Like they can pass whatever kind of law that they choose to, and they think it's better for society. But in reality, it's not. It's just going to make things worse.
You make a good observation here, and we
the law for
be thinking about it. We can talk about it later if that's okay.
we can bring it up later.
Okay, but the point of the matter is that the Constitution does not allow that to happen because we, the people, don't understand that we must stop these scoundrels from doing that. And we're just kind of, it's March Madness, or it's the Super Bowl, or it's the World Series. I mean, I use these bread and circuses things. It's not the only thing that distracts us. It might be our new car or our job, or it might be some church assignment. I don't know. We all get distracted to the point we don't pay attention, and they do just exactly what she's saying. They pass laws that violate the Constitution, and nobody seems to care. I care. I try and raise awareness, but people, by golly, unless we get more friends, it's hard to stop. She's right about that. Okay, so 3/4 of the states or 3/4 of the convention, by whatever mode may be proposed by Congress. The amendment to get rid of alcohol was proposed by Congress not to go through the state legislatures, but to do a special convention, which is how they got it past Utah's legislature. Okay, so they're going to get it regardless. And they can't change the first and fourth clauses of the 9th section of the first article, and that has to do with slavery, and it has to do with this thing with the depriving the equal suffrage of the Senate. So those things were specifically precluded from being changed by an amendment process. Everything else is on the table. They can do anything and everything, and they may change the ratification process. So let's go in here and define a constitution. It's a system of fundamental rules, principles, and ordinances for the government of a state or a nation. And then he says here, this is, by the way, Noah Webster 1828 dictionary. We've talked about this particular document before. It was the first American dictionary, and it literally captured the definitions of terms that the American founders had used. I mean, Noah Webster was one of the American founders, okay? So the Constitution is paramount. We'll define that in just a moment. To the statutes, to get to this point out here, it is paramount. The statutes are laws enacted by the legislature, limiting and controlling its power. You can't go there, it says. And in the United States, the legislature is created and its power is designated by the Constitution. So that's the definition the American founding fathers used when they defined and went forward with the Constitution. Here's what paramounts means: superior, eminent, chief, the rankest in order or in the highest in rank or order. It's above all legislative enactment, all court decrees, all pronouncements by anybody. It's superior to all of that, okay? Nothing can override it unless you amend it. If there's something wrong, Washington said to do it. So that old saying, arose by any other name, is still arose. Okay, somehow they're saying, well, we're going to call this convention. We're going to call it different names, by the way, so it's not as dangerous. And they say Convention of States, Conference of States, Article 5 Convention, Amendments Convention. They're not really Constitution conventions. These things can't hurt you. You swallow this pill and you'll be okay. Is it called a blue pill or red? It's a blue pill, isn't it? The one that you keep believing like. Yeah, okay, The Matrix, in case you've ever watched that. Okay, they're less dangerous than any other convention by any other name. We can call them these other names. They're kind of innocuous. We just do these simple, sweet things. Okay, so the Convention of States and the Conference of States aren't even mentioned in the United States Constitution. They are not a term within the Constitution. So really, if you want to be kind of persnickety about it, they're not constitutionally recognized approach to modify the Constitution. And if you read it, Convention of States and Conference of States are not found therein at all. Not at all. It's okay. I can get a drink of water while you're asking it or something.
What does Article 5 refer these meetings? I mean, what's the name?
They call it a convention.
A convention. Okay.
We can go back and read it.
So it is a convention.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And you can see blacks. Okay.
I'm just clarifying.
You're correct.
Article
These other
5
things
refers
is
to states being able to meet in a convention, a meeting, whatever we want.
you can call it the Relief Society meeting if you want. Okay.
Fine. That works.
But it's if we can change the Constitution,
Cookies that
if you change the Constitution in that meeting, it's called a convention. That's Black's Law Dictionary says that. Okay.
So whatever we call it, it's
Okay. So some say that Article 5 convention is not. Oh, I'm remiss. I'm sorry. What we got to do is have the roving mic, Phil Donahue show. Put it in front of their face or something. Okay, so you're saying, a convention's a convention regardless of the name, and that's what I'm trying to make the point. Okay. An Article 5 convention is not they say, oh, it's not a Constitution convention, it's an Article 5 convention. Okay, heaven forbid that we got to worry about those conventions. Article 5 convention's okay, though. Let's just go ahead with that. Okay, it's not a more satisfactory or less inherently dangerous way to have a convention. And it's a really gross misunderstanding. So it still arose, as I say. It sets forth the means by which a convention can be called. 2/3 of the states apply, Congress calls. Okay, there's no real special category at all. It's just a convention. So whether you call it a convention of states, a conference of states, an Article 5 convention, an amendments convention, don't be deceived. None are more safe than the other. They are all conventions, okay? Here's the definition Black's Law Dictionary gives a convention. And you can see in there, and I'm loath to normally abbreviate things, but this is actually the way it's written in Black's Law Dictionary. So the art.v, that's Article 5, okay, in their abbreviated form to keep their book from getting too thick, I guess. Okay, this is how they define it in Black's Law Dictionary. A duly constituted assembly of delegates or representatives of the people of a state or nation for the purpose of framing, revising, or amending its constitution. And Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution provides that a constitutional convention may be called on application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the states. Called on application. The states apply, Congress calls. We're going to emphasize this again. You've probably seen in the National Archives or something somewhere, the Constitution. 4 pages. Really beautifully written. But that's what they said it was. Here's your Constitution, people. 4 pages. The one you got in your pocket that you just flipped over your shoulder, 52 pages long, okay? But it's written in a narrow format and different type and stuff. But this is what it looked like when they signed it, okay? This is what it looks like in your pocket. This is what Congress and the courts say it is. And this is what you're going to see. I have been in committee meetings in legislatures, and somebody that's in favor of the convention, whatever they're calling it that day, will hold up this little pocket thing and say, this is what these people are saying here today your Constitution is. Then they hold up this nearly 3,000-page document and say, this is what your Constitution is. This is why we've got to call a convention. And they thump their chests in the table oftentimes, whatever. But 2,882 pages is what the courts seemingly have said that it's modified to through the court decisions and legislative enactment. Now, just for a minute, we just read Article 5. Does it say the courts can change it?
Yeah.
No. Does it say that the legislature could? No, it's paramount to anything the legislature, it's superior to. You can't change it anyway, but they're saying, these people that are in favor, they're holding up a 3,000-page document and saying, golly people, we got to put a lid on this. Problem is, if you just kind of track with me for a minute. If they change that little 4-page original document to nearly 3,000 pages by court decree, why couldn't they do it again? What would stop them from saying by court decree, here's how we interpret this? Nothing. So it is what it is. It says what it says, and it's written in plain English, and those words can be known, the definitions, and they can only mean what they meant in the day they were written. You can't say, we redefined that in 1932. Quit worrying, Bradley. No, that isn't the Constitution. It's not. Okay, so I call this lies, lies, and more darned lies, again, for the audience's consideration. And that came out of that statement by Mark Twain, lies, damned lies, and statistics. Okay, well, here's another guy that I'm sure you'll recognize the uniform. He was Joseph Goebbels, the chief of Nazi propaganda. Okay, and he said, it's a rough English translation, if you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. Oh yeah, our Constitution is 3,000 pages long. I mean, people come out of those meetings saying that. I saw the document. Just a minute, I'm going to go back. If you want to order that, look at the very bottom. U.S. Government Publishing Office, it gives you what you order, and you can get a copy of that. If you want, don't enjoy the reading too much, but at any rate. So they tell that lie constantly. I have been in meetings with them where they hold this up to the legislative committee that's reviewing the proposal that they approve a call for a convention. In Utah, they've won a number of times, and they still have it in effect. Okay, so I'm saying kind of look at everybody that's proposing this and see what kind of, where do you put them in categories? What category are they in? And I picked 3. Ignorant, deceived, or deceivers. And there are probably many of each kind. The most dangerous are the deceivers. Well, maybe they're not. If you ignorantly vote for it, it has the same effect as the deceiver, doesn't it? Anyway. Okay, so right now, today, throughout the nation, there's a resolution, this is the title, for a convention to amend the Constitution of the United States. It's being powerfully promoted. That is almost on every legislator's desk sometime during the sessions that they're in the last few years, okay? It's entirely based upon false pretenses. Okay, they're delusions. I call them delusions, and here's the definition again out of Noah Webster's 1828 dictionary. The act of deluding, deception, a misleading of the mind, false representation, illusion, error, or mistake proceeding from false views. Man, that seems harsh. Well, let's go to the scriptures for a minute, okay? And for this cause God shall send them strong delusion that they shall believe a lie, that they all might be damned who believe not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. So, okay, maybe you like this other definition because it's a little softer, but this one says you're going to hell if you believe it. But at any rate, I'll let you decide where it fits in your theology. Okay, so these are the pertinent words that come out of that resolution. It's a quote. You notice there's quotes at the beginning and the end of this. The legislature of the state of Utah, let's put it there because that's where we are, and Utah passed this, by the way, hereby applies to Congress under the provisions of Article 5 of the Constitution of the United States for the calling of a convention of the states. Does it say that in the Constitution? Go look for it. You won't find it. Limited to proposing amendments to the Constitution of the United States that impose fiscal restraints on the federal government. That's balanced budget stuff. Limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. Wait a minute, that's the whole Constitution. And limit the terms of office. So they want a balanced budget amendment, a term limits amendment, and then they're going to rewrite the whole Constitution for the separation of powers and the exercise of any powers they delegate. That's everything, people. You could never think of a single thing that's in the Constitution that wouldn't fit under that, sadly. Okay. So they propose amendments to impose fiscal restraints on the federal government. Again, I've said that for years I collected the proposed balanced budget amendments. Never at any time have I found one that I could not, with the slightest degree of holding my mouth just right, which they do right now to get their authority to do these horrid deficits, come up with a way to avoid that and go on with our deficit spending. It limits the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. That's the whole purpose of the federal Constitution, and limit the terms of office. People don't realize that the original Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, had term limits. They had that document in front of them when they met in Philadelphia in 1787. They knew it had term limits, and they left them out. They'd had a bad experience with them. They did not want them in the new Constitution. We could talk about it at length for why they want to do that, but everybody that's doing this, that sings to the choir in Utah or Idaho or some of these states that are quote unquote more conservative, always have this approach. In California and Hawaii and stuff, they want to get rid of the Second Amendment, okay? So they sing to the choir the song that they know they will most recognize and sing along with and pass it. Okay, so, all right. Well, we're going to find out that it's very, very open-ended by their own admission in meetings I have been in with them. Okay, so they make these false claims and many others, and I, in my own mind, find this as to be the most dangerous resolution we have ever had on this subject that's been promoted in the United States. The most dangerous brought forward to date. And it's because it's so encompassing to be able to completely rewrite everything. We're going to see they really believe it can too, just a moment. Okay, so it opens up the Constitution for revision, and there are no limits or bounds. There's nothing. They're granted the power to modify the Constitution. Okay, by definition, we've said that constitutions establish the power and jurisdiction of a government. And then seeking to change the Constitution with the intent of, quote unquote, limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government is basically saying we're going to open the whole entire Constitution to revise it or replace it. That's just what it does, because that's the whole basis of a Constitution. I was in a committee hearing on this bill during a Utah legislative session. I was testifying against the bill. A committee member, I don't know if you've ever been to these things, and if you haven't, you ought to go. I mean, you got the committee sitting on their little thrones of the bulwark that they can lean their arms on and look down upon the audience and stuff like that. And the rest of us are out in the audience. And there's usually a couple of chairs that are set up facing the committee. And if you're going to testify, you go sit at one of those chairs and you testify. Okay, so one of the committee members, though, was very astute. And he looked at the people that were proposing it, because they're in the seats to begin with. And they have almost unlimited time. In fact, very often they use up virtually all the time to promote their product. And then they say, we're going to hear from the audience, the peanut gallery. Some of us get a chance to say something. Okay, but one committee member said, oh, what are the limits of this aspect of the proposed resolution? Now, Ken Ivory was the sponsor of this. He's currently a Utah legislator. He said, the limits of the convention places upon itself. That sounds like a very asinine statement to me. I'm going, huh? Huh? Well, it's pretty open-ended. It's got some risk in that. It's kind of like buying a pig in a poke. Okay? Now, this terminology started back in the it was 1500s. Now, sometimes somebody would put in a bag, they'd put a cat. And they'd take it to marketplace and they'd be selling this as a pig. Well, pigs are more valuable than cats when it comes to growing them up and making bacon at them, you know. How many want to buy a pig, this pig? Well, unless you look inside of it, you don't know it's really a pig. You don't know it's really not a cat. If you can't see it, how are you going to know anything about it? So this was I don't know how common it was, but they got this phraseology back in the 1500s. It's like buying a pig in a poke. You haven't seen the pig, you don't know if it's not a cat they're trying to get rid of. Their cat had a bunch of kittens, and so you put them in a bag and take them to market and sell them. It sounds like a really dishonest thing to do. It is. By guess and by golly, it is a problem. Okay, so in common law, buyers have the right to inspect the goods before the purchase. Okay, and if you can't, it's kind of like Pelosi's statement that Obamacare has to be passed so we can see what's in it. I mean, I throw my neck out every time I do this, but you know, it's one of the, you say, holy cow, and they passed it. Or like this thing, it was a motto, change you can believe in. How's that working out, or has it worked out for you? See, that's the problem. You use these euphemistic terms that people, I like, and I want this change. They're going to do the kind of change I want. Bravo Sierra is what I would say, people. I see, when I was doing my undergraduate work, I took a class. I don't remember the exact title of the class. It was something like political language or something like that. I don't know. But in it, we talked about the use of euphemistic terms that can be general in nature, but can be interpreted almost any way. I could say a term like change you can believe in, and you might have some certain change, and we might all have something different in mind, but in our mind, we're going to get that kind of change. And that's how things get foisted on us with these euphemistic terms. There's a science to it. And I've done something of a study of it in the years since then and found that it's commonly used in political campaigns, so on. Anyway, so the limits the convention places upon itself. To me, when I heard that, and I was sitting in that committee meeting, it sounded, whoa, I've read the 1940 Nationalist Socialist Organization manual. By the way, the Nazis didn't call themselves Nazis. They're National Socialists, National Socialists, National Socialists. Pretty say enough times it's Nazi, okay? It's a contraction of what they really called themselves, National Socialists. Okay. All right, so this is right out of that manual. It is not limited by checks. The Führer is the leader, okay? It is not limited by checks and controls by special autonomous bodies or individual rights, but is free and independent, all-inclusive and unlimited. He is responsible only to his conscience and the people. Well, how'd that turn out? Happily ever after, I'm sure, okay? So Mark Meckler was there too. And this little committee hearing that we had, in which the committee passed the proposed amendment or proposed resolution, he was the expert witness that Ken Ivory brought forward. And Meckler then chimed in, quoting, "No more specificity is possible because tying it down too tightly would prevent other state legislatures from being so bold as to bring forth a call for a convention that might be counted with this one to meet the 2/3 constitutional requirement for Congress to convene a convention if it did not meet their view of what ought to be addressed in the convention." All right, kids, we're going to talk about singing to the choir here in a minute. But this is exactly what they were trying to do in New York, to take all of their calls for the last 200 plus years for a convention to say, see, New York wants a convention, put them on the list, the 2/3 that need to be there. And New York said, the heck you say. We're going to rescind all of the ones we've called for. And they did, and that was a victory too. But what it says is, they're not trying to use exact wording because they want as much wiggle room as they can. They're going to go with whatever big spectrum of whatever they can to get a call, and that's what they've been trying to do in recent legislatures to get this weasel worded thing through so they get the 2/3 of the states. Okay? So what we've had recently is proposals to eliminate the Second Amendment. By the way, I'll give you a specific one in California. They passed last session and was enrolled by their it's like lieutenant governor in our state, but I can't remember if they call her as a Secretary of State or what. But at any rate, it's enrolled right now as a call for a convention out of California. I'll read it to you in a minute. Eliminate the Second Amendment, the Electoral College, and that's a big mistake. 68th Federalist paper says it's the only thing in the Constitution people didn't beef about. People want to protect the right to abortion. They want to mandate health care and so on. Okay, so there's about 11,800 proposed amendments out there that have been proposed the entire history of the United States. So if they can weasel word any of those in such a manner that they can get it for a call for a convention, they're going to try and do that. Okay? Okay. We already have a, yes, ma'am.
I think that some things are just flat out wrong. Some things are just flat out wrong. Like legalizing murder of unborn children should be done away with. I mean, like, if you're like wanting to protect the mother, then I guess find the other ways, leave it alone.
Well, your point is well making, and the point that she's making for those that are listening on the network is that some things you just shouldn't ought to be doing, and legalizing killing kids is something you should not do. And so, but people want to put it in a constitution because they believe that's the superior. We're going to talk about this next time. That is the law of the land, for crying out loud, if you get it in the Constitution. But right now, the Constitution already defines and restrains the power of the general government. And everything else, we're going to read the 45th Federalist paper next, but not the whole thing. We don't have time. But honestly, James Madison said it very succinctly. Federalist 45, the powers delegated by the proposed Constitution of the federal government are few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. The former will be exercised principally on external objects. So if something's in there that appertains to the general government, it's normally external things, like he says, war, peace, negotiation, foreign commerce, with which last the power of taxation will be the most part connected. Their opinion was that we could run the government on import taxes, basically. Oh, man alive. How far we have strayed. He went on to say, the powers reserved to the several states will extend to all the objects which, in the ordinary course of affairs, concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people and the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state. Another time, in an address he gave in February of 1792 on the floor of the House, that other way is a little bit confusing, isn't it? He said, I, sir, have always conceived, I believe those who proposed the Constitution conceived, it is still more fully known and more material to observe that those who ratified the Constitution conceived that this is not an indefinite government deriving its powers from the general terms prefixed to the specific powers, but a limited government tied down to the specified powers which explain and define the general terms. So it's clearly defined. The 10th Amendment put an exclamation point and period behind that. It said, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. If the power wasn't delegated to the United States government, it doesn't have it. That's the bottom line of this. And then many of you that have been involved in some of these discussions have heard us discuss St. George Tucker on a number of occasions. I consider him to be the preeminent constitutional scholar of the founding era. But he said, the powers vested in Congress, the privileges of the members of each house are severally enumerated in the Constitution. That means they listed them, they numbered them, you could do it. Consequently, it would appear that they were not capable of extension beyond the letter of the Constitution itself. Then you'll notice I've got the 10th Amendment in here because this was originally to be the 12th Amendment, but they only ratified, they didn't do the first two, and so they ratified the ones after. This is what I was referring to. The 10th Amendment to the Constitution seems also not to favor a constructive extension of the powers of the federal government or any department thereof. You can't just redefine it and say, oh no, they really meant this. By the way, a bill was just passed in the House of Representatives. All four of Utah's House delegates voted in favor of it. One of them helped sponsor it. And when I went, how? What were they thinking? And they claimed as their authority to do so, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18. Well, you go look at that again and you'll find out that it says the Congress has power to carry out the powers that are delegated. There is no power delegated to do what they said they were doing. So they use a false, they lie to say they've got authority constitutionally to do what they're doing. But all four of Utah's Congress people, Congress critters, some people call them, they voted for it in error. One of those guys is running for the Senate now. Be a great replacement for Romney because he'll be just like him. Anyway, Case St. George Tucker also said it is a written contract, talking about the Constitution. Government was reduced to its elements, its object was defined, its principles ascertained, its powers limited and fixed. Pretty definitive. Nailed the feet to the floor, that's all there is, okay? Okay, so those that are in office violate their oath. That's the bottom line. Constantly, they violate their oath. We're letting it happen. We're being part of this problem. We're complicit in it, okay? So, to put the rewriting of a constitution in the hands of people that are already violating it is a height of lunacy. Who got us in the trouble we're in? Those that have been in office. It may have been the last 50 or 75 or 80 years, yes.
I would say we did. Because
You're right.
giving them the consequences that they need. It's like telling the child they were very busy playing outside and then they decide to go out of their bounds. It's like telling a child, we should just keep playing, nothing.
Your point that there should be, we should have consequences for what they're doing, and we are not exercising it. We, the people.
Tell them, okay, it's time to go in or time to go in jail. The problem is when we do stand up and say something, they're not going to admit that they did anything wrong, and so then we have to have all this.
The problem is, you're stating the problem, and it's accurate that the people are responsible for the people we put in government. And those people are actually not abiding by the constitutional oath that they take, and we, the people, are allowing them to get away from it.
So we should impeach them.
Well, impeachment happens in certain circumstances, and removal by vote happens in others. But you're right, we need to get them out of office.
Because
Right.
they will continue to create problems as long as they're in office. Like as soon as we see that they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, we should look at impeaching them because otherwise they will continue to create problems.
That's an astute observation, and we, the people, we need more friends of these principles so that we can remove them from office. So we can't let the lunatics continue to run the asylum, as is muttered. Okay, so yeah, you did. You said out loud the thing you were thinking. Okay, so yes, so there's a lot of delusions that are out there. We're going to look at those delusions now, and what they're trying to get into passing this assertion. So they say, oh, the states can call a convention to modify the Constitution. We've read these. Convention of the States are not found in the United States Constitution. It's used as a euphemistic way of making us think like it's not as dangerous as it really would have been if it was a real convention. Okay, so allows the states to apply for a convention, not call for a convention, to not call a convention to modify the Constitution. Here's what it says in Article 5. The Congress, on application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention. It's an imperative. When the 2/3 of the states apply, Congress will then call. So the states apply, Congress calls, and assertion 2, the Congress has no power in the matter. This is what they're saying. Once it gets called, Congress doesn't have any power left in this thing. Well, Congress is empowered by Article 5 to call the convention once the required numbers of the states have applied. Okay? And Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, which I just mentioned a few moments ago, delegates to the Congress the power to do all that is necessary to carry out the powers delegated within the Constitution. So let's just say Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5, Congress shall have power to coin money. So they set out all the parameters about coining money. They define what money is and what the mix of precious metals is going to be. They build a mint, they pay for the staff, they hire the staff. All that stuff is implied by the fact that they can coin the money. Okay, so here we go. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, Congress shall have power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or officer. There's no other power granted or delegated in this little clause, as is inferred by this bill that all 4 of Utah legislators in the Congress voted for. They imply that this gives them more power to do things beyond what was delegated. And as you'll see there specifically, it says, carrying into execution the foregoing powers, go read Article 1, Section 8 again, and other powers that are delegated to them. It doesn't say you can create more powers for yourself. It's not an elastic clause. It's a clause that allows them to do their jobs. So, getting back though to what we're talking about, Congress has the power to call the convention, and so Congress will carry out all the things that are in fulfillment of that power. They're not going to give that away. They don't just roll over and say, oh, you guys go do what you want. We've called it, now you guys do what you want. No. So there's a group called the Congressional Research Service, and I've dealt with them when I've been back in Washington. They're kind of a think tank. Congress defers to them. They're in-house, if you will. They're an in-house think tank. When constitutional matters come up, and they ask them, what do you think about this? Okay. So in 2012, 2014, and 2016, this Congressional Research Service, I'll refer to it as the CRS in the future, they put out they reviewed what the duty of Congress was if they had a convention. And they concluded that Congress has the authority and will not acquiesce it to anybody else, won't hand it off. They've advised Congress, no, you've got to fulfill your duty and these things to get up to this. Well, the third assertion is that the states can collude. They can get together and commiserate a little bit among themselves. And by prior arrangement, they can do a compact, an agreement, or whatever they want to call it, call a convention for their purposes and their prior discussions, and then that will supersede what Congress sets up. Well, the United States Constitution says you can't get together. In fact, in advance of these things, the states can't go in and collude and argue and discuss and make decisions before Congress gives them the authority. Congress has to give consent. Here's what it says in Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3. No state shall, without the consent of Congress, enter into an agreement or compact with another state. How much more specific can they be, saying that you can't make a prior agreement that overrides stuff that we're going to tell you to do? Okay? Congress didn't give them that prior agreement, and they're not going to. Okay? So, if there's people that are out there that are fostering this Convention of the States or Article 5 Convention or whatever else they're going to call it, have already done this, they're in violation of the Constitution. We should recognize that they're some of the ones that are violating the Constitution.
How would you suggest we use Article 5 then?
Well, that's a good question, and hopefully by the end of it, I'll tell you what the Article 5 Convention is there for a reason, in my opinion. I'll just overhang I'll overhang it a little bit right now. See, there's a lot of people that ask that question to me that are in favor of it. Oh, Bradley, so why is it there? Do you believe the Constitution inspired by God? Yeah, I do. So what, was God flapping his lips and didn't really mean it? No, I don't. Yeah, he had a bad day. So no, No, I don't believe that. Let's just take the law of Moses. Who gave the law of Moses? Okay, it was by his decree, wasn't it? Okay, some people believe it was Jehovah, some say God, some know it was, Jehovah is Christ and all this. We don't need to discuss that stuff. Your answer is pretty straightforward. God gave it, the top dog. What? Anyway, okay. So what happened when Jesus Christ got on the earth? He fulfilled the law, didn't he? He gave a higher law. And if you read, what he gave in the Beatitudes, for example, he says, I came to fulfill the law. And now here's the law. Okay, so he gave it, he fulfilled it. And the founding fathers, I believe that we have a lot of evidence that they were absolutely convinced, and I'm absolutely convinced, for whatever value that has, that God had his finger upon this, had his hand upon it. Providence had on it. They used a lot of different terms. Was the one that brought this document forth. It is a document of liberty. That's what he intended to have on this land and be a beacon of hope to other nations. And I believe that just like the Old Testament law of Moses and the fulfillment of the law by Jesus Christ, he gave it, he fulfills it, and it overrides it. And I believe God works by law, his law. And he doesn't violate his law. He's pretty strict about that, Pretty good example for all of us. But the fact of the matter is, I believe that that's there. When the Savior returns, he will call a convention. And within those parameters, with him as Lord of Lords and King of Kings, he will modify the law that he gave originally. That's why I believe it's there. I don't believe until that happens that we have a right to dink around with it, okay? And it's interesting to me, and I've gave you a really kind of truncated statement on that, but in the interest of time, I had a much larger meeting than this at one point that I was speaking to, and there was a state legislator, and he was sitting on this side of me, just right over in the front row, and you can tell body language from people. I don't believe a damn word you're saying, kind of thing. He doesn't have to say it. It's just there. And he was in that body language thing, and he says, so why do we have that in there if you think it's an inspired document? I said, I'm glad you asked that question. I says, do you mind if we answer this? I asked the audience, and it was a real big group. And I explained it in more detail than I just said to you, okay? But to his credit, he unfolded and he said, you're right. I believe what you've just said. I've changed my position. I'm going, holy cow, vote for this guy. Anyway, so sometimes people have a touching of the heart, if you will. And yes, sir. Sure.
I just wanted to comment real quick. While that's, I love the inspiring long answer to that question. I thought some of the audience and people who watch this later might be interested also in just a simple answer for why is it there. Could also be so we have two problems. Sometimes the Constitution's followed, sometimes it's not. You could break everything down to that. Article 5 is for when the Constitution is being followed, but yet something's still not working. That's why we have an amendment process. When the Constitution is not being followed, the answer is nullification. You have to enforce the Constitution, right? So we have to get to where we're enforcing the Constitution, and then we see, there's still something that kind of doesn't work. Now there's a justification to use any of the proper amendment processes. So that was
absolutely.
Yeah.
And you're correct. And it's goes back to what George Washington said. If it's ever wrong, we can fix it. Okay. And the process of nullification has some parameters of appropriate use also. There are sometimes nullification should not be used. And Madison and Jefferson agreed on that. There are other times it must be used, and we need to understand those things. If we don't understand them, and we don't understand the appropriate response, then we're going to do the wrong thing. In 1828, Madison said that they shouldn't do nullification on the things that were being done, but it was because that it had another solution constitutionally. And if we don't understand this stuff, we can't ever do it right. Yes, sir.
What her question was again? If I understood it.
How we're going to use Article 5 if it's not the way that you're talking about?
Okay,
How can we bring it into use?
Can it be used correctly?
it can be used correctly.
It already has 27 times.
That's how they've done it 27 times. Not all of them correctly, by the way.
Well,
That's how the amendment process is supposed to work. If we find a flaw, we correct it with Article 5. Okay? But to call a convention right now is probably one of the most dangerous things we could possibly do. It says you can call a convention. It doesn't say you have to. You can. But in a minute, you'll see why it's not a good idea. Okay, and hopefully you'll understand that a convention right now would probably destroy the nation. Because who will be there? The people that have been screwing it up already. They're our natural leaders. You're not going to be there, I guarantee. You know? Slim and none chance of that. But the fact of the matter is, virtually everybody that will be there, and you'll see a collage of people in a minute that I've said, and I've suggested this collage because they're the current people that are in office. They're our natural leaders. They're the people that people have selected. And by golly, we're going to probably continue to go with them until we sink. And we can't let that happen because they can rewrite everything if they get a convention. They can propose that it's got to be ratified. They can propose, but the people in, however they decide to ratify it, can change the ratification process. Maybe. Maybe.
yes,
Maybe.
that's our responsibility.
But maybe they could write a new constitution that says you ratify it by the majority vote of the House and the Senate.
The Constitution is going to be written. I didn't come here to hijack this,
Yeah,
but that doesn't hold water. I'll tell you, if
Really?
the socialists want to take over, they're not going to use a convention. Trust me.
they're already doing it.
Doing it.
Yeah,
with
they are.
Congress.
They're already doing it. But if Congress rewrites it,
Run away.
if Congress rewrites it, what's convention going to say?
It's already over.
That's what's going to happen. So that's why we don't recommend it right now. But anyway, let's move on with this for a minute. Let's see if we can cover some of these issues and see how they might be applied. Okay. In their fourth assertion, and Enoch, are we stopping at the half-hour mark? Because we can carry this on next week if you want. I mean, next time we get together if you wish. We're not even halfway through.
Then I guess, yeah, you can find a convenient.
Breaking point? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I can pick it up anytime, anywhere. Okay, so the states say they're going to be in charge once the rules of engagement get, they say, okay, you're going to be able to have a convention, you guys run with it, okay? So they say they're going to be able to define and call delegates, choose the number of delegates. They're going to do it on a one state, one vote circumstance, because that was the way the first one was done. But democracy wasn't a big thing in America then. They're going to try and control what they can vote on. All those kind of things are going to happen. Again, in those Congressional Research Service articles that were written back in those years, they say, no, that isn't the way it's going to be. Congress is going to exercise the prerogative in the location of the convention, the dates of the convention, the delegate count allotment. They're going to do a state-by-state vote allocation arrangement. We're going to talk about this more in a few. And they're going to protect the delegates from any kind of punitive action that may happen for actions they take while they're in the convention. We're going to talk about that later too. So let's get looking at Congress, what they say they're going to do, and then we'll move ahead and how it violates what these people are in favor of. They're not going to leave the hands of the states, according to the view that's in the Senate. They're going to, here's what some of those that are looking for are saying. Their proposed voting in the convention will be one state, one vote. Okay, California will have one vote, Wyoming will have one vote. Okay, we're going to see how that will work and how people will assume that. California has a population of over 39 million. Wyoming has under 600,000. One state, one vote would mean that each citizen of Wyoming would have 65 more times power than each citizen in California. Because Wyoming would be able to override anything those 39 million people wanted in California by negating their vote. Okay, so the governor, the senators, the congressmen, the legislature, the citizens are not going to let that happen. It just ain't going to happen. And that's just a fact of life in today's world. Okay, they're going to want equal representation, and I want you to understand what that will mean. So, there's been an analogous system out there called the Electoral College. And those are chosen by the number of congressional seats you have and the number of senatorial seats you have. Okay, Utah has 4 congressional seats and 2 senatorial seats. Okay, so we get 6 votes. Now, by the way, congressmen and senators cannot be electors. Okay, so let's look at a few people that are in here. California has 54 votes. Okay, Wyoming 3. That's the way the Electoral College is set up. Idaho 4, Utah 6. I put a few selected ones in here because you say the people in the kind of the Rocky Mountain stuff, add their votes up. If you think they're similar thinkers to you or what you might hope might come out because they have more common sense or whatever you believe, compare them to what the rest of let's just compare them to New York. You don't even come close with adding those Rocky Mountain states together as a block. One state could override it all, okay? And we're going to talk about how California has over 10% of all the electoral votes, okay, right now. Yes, sir.
Getting more as people from Mexico come in there and come to their state. They don't have to legally be living there, but the census, so there's more people in, so they're going to get more.
The idea of the census causing a skewing is what you're talking about. And as they increase their numbers, by the way, California just did lose some electoral votes because of the outmigration. And the idea that we should allow illegal people to be counted towards how the representation goes out is a farce of an idea. I get your point. But so there's that dynamic that's playing out there right now. But in many ways, they're either in the process of achieving it. In some areas they have, it seems like. But at any rate, so, yes.
I do not think that the illegals should be included in the voting because they're not legal. So if they want to vote, they should become legal citizens. Otherwise, forget it.
That's her point is that if you're not a citizen, you shouldn't be able to vote. And I think that's that's your position too, but some states are allowing it to happen. Okay.
They can vote or not, but get the number of people living there, they can get more seats in the
That's right.
in the House or whatever.
And
Regardless, they vote.
and that's a big problem. And that's why they say they're doing the illegal run. Okay. So let me just look at California. California has a really destructive effect on the whole nation. Okay. So this is the thing I was telling you we were going to cover on. September 21st, 2023. So it's only a few months ago. They had a joint resolution that was filed with their Secretary of State. It passed the legislature, and you're going to see that this was veto-proof legislative power. The legislature was sure they wanted these things, even if the governor had vetoed them, which he wouldn't. Newsom was fully in concurrence to this. They could have overridden a governor veto. Okay. So it was an application for an Article 5 convention. Okay, so I'm quoting, if you notice there's quote marks in here. Affirm that federal, state, and local governments may adopt public safety regulations limiting aspects of firearms acquisition, possession, public carry, and use by individuals. and to impose as a matter of national policy, they're going to want this put as a national policy, the following firearms regulations and prohibitions. So they've filed an Article 5 request. They want to go to a convention and put these things forward. So here's what it says. 1, universal background checks as a prerequisite to purchase or acquire a firearm. Okay, again, they're singing to the choir there. That's what that choir wants. This would never fly in Utah. But we'll only have 6 votes to oppose this at a convention. California has full 10% of the proposed number of delegates. Okay, so they want universal background checks as a prerequisite. Prohibition on sales, loans, or other transfers of firearms to those under 21 years of age with a few restrictions. 3, a minimum waiting period after the purchase or acquisition of a firearm before that firearm may be delivered to the buyer or acquirer. And 4, a prohibition on the sale, loan, or transfer of assault weapons, including AR-15s and other weapons of war to private civilians. End quote. So California is on record of wanting to call a convention for these purposes. Hawaii has similarly tried to do things as early as 2012, okay? Their choirs want this feedback. You can look at that link if you wish and confirm for yourself. It actually says that. Okay, so we're going to talk about this for just a moment. The vote in the Senate was 24-11. In the Assembly, which is their house basically, was 53-17. The legislature overwhelmingly wants to destroy the Second Amendment, are willing to call a convention to do that. They've got the largest population. They will be participating in any Article 5 convention. Just the way it is. Okay, they're going to have a lot of influence. They got 10% of the votes. If they chose the people, then they're probably going to be state legislators because they're the ones that are their natural leaders now. And how did they vote? Read higher in this little slide. So they're going to lead other states. How do you think New York will follow this lead? Hey guys, this is a great idea. I don't know why we didn't think about it, okay? I have an aphorism I live by. Never been proven wrong. It's kind of a cutesy little statement. I don't know if I can take it to the bank rightly, but the higher the population density, the greater the propensity to socialism, thing you're worried about. And what we find in these high population density places is a greater propensity to socialism. But if you have a university in that setting, or multiple universities, it kind of goes a hockey stick shot, okay? So California is going to lead the other anti-gunners on this thing. Okay. Article 5 doesn't say how you're going to get your delegates and how many will be there, how they're going to be selected. But here's what these congressional research reports said, and here's the one out of 2014, quoting again. Between 1973 and 1972, they're reporting on what Congress did. 22 bills were introduced into the U.S. House and 19 into the Senate that sought to establish a procedural framework that would apply to an Article 5 convention. The Senate passed the Federal Constitution Convention Procedures Act on 2 separate occasions, Senate 215 in 71 and Senate 1272 in 83. The House did not pass either one of those. So they did not get passed into law. But what they did was they set a kind of a direction in where they thought these House and Senate were going. House didn't pass them, as I say, so they are not in law. There is not a canonized law out there, if you will, that says this is how a convention is going to be run. Up to this date, they do not have such an animal. Okay, so these bills, though, that are noted, 215 and 1272, call for proportional representation based upon the formula of the Electoral College, not 1 vote per state. So California is going to have this massive influence with 10% of the vote in the Electoral College. So let's look at the Electoral College for just a few minutes. Okay, the Electoral College has 538 votes. 435 come from the House in terms of the count. Again, the House and the Senate are not going to be members of the thing. 100 come from the Senate, and 3 votes on this stupid 23rd Amendment come for Washington, D.C. So there's 538 votes in the Electoral College. Do the math, 10% of that, 54. That's what California currently has. So 10%. Now, just for interest's sake, since there's 538 votes in the Electoral College, you cut that in half, it's 269. 269 is exactly 50-50. If you have 270 electoral votes, that's a winner for the president. Okay, that's why they say 270 votes necessary to win the presidency. Okay, so California has 54 votes towards that 270 already. Okay, and it's usually a winner take all. There's a couple of states that have some modifications of that. But I picked Idaho because it's less than Utah and more than some of the others, but it's less than 0.75% of the total count of the Electoral College. So you think about some of these states that you might have some identity with and say, well, they think a lot like us. They're going to be hardly a blip on the radar in this thing. There was another suggestion that says this Electoral College kind of unfavorably biases in favor of the little states. And so we want to have a purely population representative kind of vote out there. If that passes, if that's the approach that's taken, small states like Idaho and Utah and Wyoming and Montana and South Dakota, North Dakota, you're going to almost go off the radar. If Idaho, with its 4 votes, 2 House and 2 Senate, goes to 0.75%, hardly noise. Okay, and it'll be less than that. Okay, so that's not outside the realm of possibility because everybody wants this democracy kind of thing going. So it's a really dangerous thing. Okay, so here's another assertion. The advocates of convention say that, oh, we can keep the delegates under our control. What are you worried about, Bradley? These guys are just going to do what we sent them there to do. I might remind you that when Delaware sent their representatives to the 1787 convention, that's what they told them. They said, if you're there and they do anything other than propose amendments to the existing Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, you come home. You got to come home. Well, that's a really dumb thing. If they had done that, because that happened in May of 1787, Delaware would never have been represented at the meeting. They would have gone and they wouldn't have had a voice. So the Delaware delegates stayed, fortunately, for both the country and for Delaware. By the way, that's the approach Utah has taken. Utah says, if you guys do anything different than what we told you to do, you come home. Oh, that's good. So Utah's vote against the Second Amendment destroying kind of thing will never be heard. Can you see how that works? This is so stupid, we can't even hardly believe it, but that's how the legislature has approached it in Utah. Okay, so what they're going to do, okay, tell me what got you bothered, and then let's talk.
The Utah told them to come home if they didn't vote for it?
Okay, no, okay, let's back up. No, they're just, well, they maybe would, maybe,
Of course.
okay, but they're going to, maybe.
Must be
So you're talking about an Article 5 convention.
If there was a convention going, okay, and what happened was it took a turn that the Utah didn't like.
They could,
This second point on here, they're going to call their senators home or their representatives home. Yeah. Okay, now you're going to find something here about these charges in just a moment too. Because that is a fallacious reason also, because it'll never happen. I'll tell you why. Okay. They're going to send their delegates with voting instructions. Well, California's going to say, we want a Second Amendment instruction. Utah's going to say, well, we want a balanced budget amendment. California say, we'll give you that if we give us this, whatever. You know, there's going to be log rolling. Okay. So Utah says, if you don't do what we told you to, we'll call you home. There's a suggestion they might be replaced. They might very well be. But once the convention's underway, and let's say they're going to be in session for 2 months and you bring them home the first month, you got to pack your bags and get out there again to take up the bag again. So it puts you way behind the curve, okay? Anyway, they're going to do criminal penalties that are predefined by the states for violations. Some say misdemeanor, some say felony. That's been brought up here. Some are by fine, some are by prison terms. And by golly, we're not going to put up with nothing. You don't do what we say, we're going to put you in jail when you come back. Well, it's interesting that the Congressional Research Service has addressed that and how Congress will prevent that from happening. When Congress calls a convention, they say we're going to protect the delegates from such actions taken by their home states. And it's been done before. What they did is they say we need something that's very similar to Article 1, Section 6, Clause 1, that protects the U.S. congressional representatives from legal harassment during the fulfillment of their duties. It already says that. Get it out. Read it in your Constitution. They say that we can't kick your butt for doing something wrong while you're in Congress. Okay? We can't put you in jail. In fact, some of you may remember Patrick Kennedy. When Patrick Kennedy, it's not speculative, it's exactly what they're saying. It's exactly what the Congress has been told. And if Congress does it or doesn't do it, they haven't put it in law yet.
Yes, they are research.
Okay, here's what happened one of the committee meetings I was in. I brought up these Congressional Research Service reports. And I said what I said, and I told you. And they said what you just said. They're not damn fools. They're not going to listen to them. Basically, that was what they told me. And I said, yeah, all I can do is give you the copies of the reports. And the one of the chair of the committee says, if you will, I'd like to see him. I says, okay, if I can get him back. So they sent down an aide into the lower level of the kingdom there. And this aide came to me and says, I worked for the Congressional Research Service. He whispered this to me as I was gathering my paperwork. He says, they listen because they don't have any better information. And he said, I guarantee they're a big footprint in the Senate and the House. That's what he told me. Okay, so Article 1, Section 6, Clause 1. Congress is protected. When Patrick Kennedy wrecked his car when he was under the influence, 2 o'clock in the morning, whatever it was, and Washington Capitol Police showed up, he staggers out of the car and he says, I'm on my way to the House to vote. Couldn't do anything to him. He knew that was what they were going to do. Anyway, so that's there. Sometimes it's abused and sometimes it's necessary. There's a real reason why it's there. We talk about that sometime if you'd like. So here's what Article 1, Section 6, Clause 1 says. They, House and the Senate, who's referred to here, shall in all cases except treason, felony, and breach of the peace be privileged from arrest during the attendance of the session of their respective houses, and in going to and returning from the same, and for any speech or debate in either house, they shall not be questioned in any other place. That is written into the Congressional Research Service recommendation of how they call a convention. So that these things, like Utah has said, we're going to call you, we'll get you a felony, we'll put you in jail, we'll fine you, whatever we do. And the House and the Senate are saying, probably not, based upon their Congressional Research Service findings. Okay. So, the Constitution doesn't set up anything other than a convention. It's autonomous. They can choose to go whatever path they choose to, and it can't be controlled or manipulated by a state from that home state. That's just the way it is, their autonomous body. Here's the other thing. If somebody attempted to bring about a felony charge or felony is what we're talking about here in Utah, any kind of misdemeanor or anything like that, the president or governor could pardon them. It's been abused before, and you've seen it in many cases. So that would be exercised as needed if necessary. So look, it's 1:30. We can start at assertion 7 if you want to. Keep going. Well, nobody needs to stay for crying out loud.
But I'm okay. Keep going because we're kind of in the middle of that.
Yeah.
I feel like we should just leave.
Bail and come back.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. You talk about it being an assumption. Okay, we make assumptions, but can you bring anything out that would be? Anything could happen. There's no doubt about it. It is. So why put our Constitution at risk? Anything could happen. Because we violated it, not because we're upholding it. We need people like you that are standing up and saying, over my dead body, we're not going to do this. That's a good question. But we can't do this without people.
We have an entire program of how to fix it, which we talk about every month and have other classes and training and things that we publish. That a decade of being in the trenches, trying to
A solution.
a solution. So we have a solution. It's unique. It's
It works. It's worked before.
right.
Yeah. But
Starts local.
we can't do it without enough friends. We just can't. If we walk away, throw up our hands and give it up, we're done. We're toast. And that's what we're trying to prevent.
Even if you change it. Sorry.
Yeah, better turn your mic on there, guy.
So even if we change it, you still need a mechanism to enforce whatever your new changes are. That's why the founders gave us the right to assemble, the right to petition for redress, the freedom of the press. All these specific things that were preserved are so that we have the right to enforce the Constitution on our representatives. We're not using those rights properly. We're not educated in how to use those rights. So even if you change it, the body of the people still has to know, well, what are the new changes and how do we make sure they're following those? And you can't just create another government body to watch the government, because that's just another government, right? George Washington said the Constitution keepers are the people. So that you will never get around, there's no shortcut to the people understanding how it works. And then us using our efforts, our energy, locally, in little ways every day, right? And I've seen lots of examples of this functioning properly. And our whole manual, I usually talk about this at the end, but we have here the Local Committee General Guidebook. It takes all these principles of natural law and gives a lot of practical step-by-step things on here's some examples of how you implement that locally. But anyway, I'll turn it back to you.
Well, thank you. But the point of the matter is that if we don't understand what's being done to us, and we're not willing to resist it, and we're not willing to gather friends to the cause, we're going to end up with another 3,000-page document that says, this is our new Constitution. And nothing's going to stop the legislatures and the courts from continuing to violate it. So that's why we need to go through with a Constitution that's not broken. What's broken is that we, the people, are refusing to put people in office that abide by it. And we're in real trouble right now. The empty suits that sit in Utah's, or almost every other one, there's a few rare exceptions, but most of them are empty suits that are just going along for the ride. I promise this, and I give you that, and you keep putting me in office. And we can't keep doing it. So anyway, that's what this is about, is trying to help understand the process. But what is being set up for the convention right now will absolutely end in failure. I've seen them work. Okay, so we couldn't get false amendments because we can't modify the amendment process. Well, they use an excuse that says, well, the Supreme Court wouldn't allow the ratification window for the Equal Rights Amendment to be extended from 7 to 10 years. So that means it'd be impossible to change the ratification process in the convention. They're totally irrelevant to each other. They don't have any overlap at all. And they say, oh, they wouldn't let us extend the Equal Rights Amendment by 3 years for the ratification. And so they couldn't change the ratification process in a convention. They did in 1787. Okay, so the unrelated. If any part of the Constitution can be changed in a convention, every part can be. Every part can be. And so it's just a really deflective comment to say that. The Article 5, excuse me, the original Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, had a revision process. It took 100% of the states to do it. It was already there. They were called to revise that, to revise the Articles of of Confederation, and they set it aside, even though they'd been called to just amend, and then they wrote a whole new one, and that included a new ratification process. That was one of the things that the people that the anti-federalists were having to beef about. Okay, so that's a precedent. It's the only truly similar convention we've had up to this point, and the promoters refuse to admit that that could be a possibility. Again, speculation, but it could. Nobody can deny that it couldn't be. Term limits, another proposed justification. Okay, it's necessary because we keep getting them reelected. The fact is we don't need term limits because we have the term limits already in there called the ballot box. That's just the way it is. Truth of the matter is that in November this year, we could get rid of all 435 of our congressmen and a third of our senators. 2 years later, we could do the same thing again. Every 4 years, we could get rid of the executive, okay? All of that stuff is available to us right now if we had an informed, motivated, devoted, principles-based electorate. Okay, the problem is that we've got this incumbent mentality that we keep re-electing people. And every incumbent that wants election generally gets it. Okay, but we get the kind of government we deserve.
All day.
Yeah, who's going to save us from us, right? We've seen the enemy and he is us. Okay. We got this entitlement mentality. I've told you about the time I was running for Senate the second time I ran. And in a large university auditorium setting, I gave a talk and was asked, doing questions and answers after. And a woman asked me, what would you give me if I vote for you? It's like, oh, really? You're being pretty bold in that. Anyway, we had an interesting exchange. We sell our votes to the ones that say they're going to give us the biggest goodie box. And they sell their votes within the House and the Senate too, by the way. So this term limit off thing is an absolute absurdity. There's always another socialist waiting in the wings that's ready to take it over. You look at Mitt Romney walks out the door. How many have we got lined up to take his place? Maybe all of them aren't as bad as he is, but many of them are. Okay, they always want to step into that office. In the 22nd Amendment, we've had term limits on the U.S. president. I would really like to hear your justification for thinking that's improved quality of presidents we've had. I mean, holy cow. I mean, yeah, we've had one dork that went longer, but none of the others that have come in have really had a higher standard to speak of, different ways and so on and so forth. We haven't got higher quality presidents. Now, let's talk about the lame duck for a session. Here's what happens in voting now. We have an election the first week in November. They sit in office, if they get defeated, they sit in office until they take they seat another Congress at the beginning of January. So there's 2 months in which we have a lame duck session. And a lot of times that's where senators and congressmen that have been voted out of office do a lot of damage. They show their true colors. It happened in 2010, wherein in the spring Republican convention in Utah, they voted to not have Bob Bennett to be a senator going on past January. Bob Bennett showed his true colors from the spring until January when he left office. He did immense damage, in my opinion, to propose and carry out things that showed his true colors. I sweat bullets in that 2-month period that's normally there between election, when people know they lost, and when they get out of office. It's kind of like the story of the unfaithful steward in the scriptures that the Savior told. He was fired, but he got to stay on for a while, and he did further injustice to his master. But what would happen is, suppose we limited senators to 2 6-year terms. First 6 years, the senator's looking over his shoulder. Hey guys, I'm gonna get another chance at this. Come on, I'm gonna toe the line. But during the second term, they'd be lame ducks for the entire 6 years. They could not, they don't have to answer to anybody. They know they're on the way out. And just like that unrighteous steward in the scriptures, he feathered his nest with those that were ultimately going to bring him into a consulting job, or maybe he was going to have some, cushy corporate position if he helped them get such and such, whatever. Okay? They got 6 years then. That's going to be a lame duck session for 6 years, a bad thing. Almost every one of those that want to have a convention want to do something like this. Okay? So they could do untold damage in those 6 years. Okay? They could, if you got a third of your Senate, 33, 34 of them, they're always lame ducks. They could collude and collaborate together to do some really, really bad things. Supreme Court's an even bigger political plum because everybody believes that the Constitution is what the Supremes say it is. And it's not. It is what it says it is, the plain English language of it, okay? So we have this effort, and we're going to see a picture of somebody that many have great regard for in just a minute with his book. I've deconstructed every proposed process of his in another presentation I do, and it's very interesting that either any and all of them can be ultimately, any and all of his proposals could be deconstructed in a very reasonable way, I think. So in addition to that, if we had term limits, who'd want James Madison out of office? Father of the Constitution. He's doing his job. Who would want to take him out? Okay. But yeah, we've always got another socialist waiting to step in. Okay. So what we need to do is get us as an electorate that's willing to understand the principles, get our representatives to uphold that oath of office and operate within the constraints of the Constitution. Okay, so it's interesting that this term limits thing was before the Founding Fathers in May of 1787. It's interesting that the Articles of Confederation had term limits. It was written right in. Well, they had that convention, that Constitution. They were in convention. They could have easily written into the new Constitution, but they'd had an unsatisfactory experience with it. And they left term limits off. They purposely left them out when they wrote the new Constitution. Okay, people should be allowed to choose who they want to represent them. And that's literally what they're giving away with term limits. Okay, assertion 9. What I think I might do, Enoch, is go through 10, and then if we decide, you and I can talk, if we want to talk about some of the parameters that probably could use further elucidation, but again, we're going to get done through the 10 and maybe we'll call it if that's okay. Okay, so they want to have a convention to seek to limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. Okay, again, we go back to Noah Webster's statement, the Constitution is paramount. It limits and controls the legislature. Legislature is created in it, the power is designated. It already does that by definition. Constitution conforms to this. And the specific powers were exactly spelled out in the Constitution. There's no elastic clause. It's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18 that we read a little while ago. No reading of that could ever say that allows you to have more power if you want to take it. It says you got the power to carry out what you've been given. Okay, then the Bill of Rights, in the preamble, it says that they put in further declaratory and restrictive clauses to prevent misconstruction or abuse of power. National government has no more power than what is spelled out within the Constitution, none whatsoever. Remember, it's paramount to statutes, and it limits and controls the government. That's what Webster said in it. You can't violate those and keep your oath of office. It's violated on every whim. We understand that. It absolutely is. A convention to rewrite will not solve the baseline problems that we have and we're struggling under. So many of these proposed things that they want to do, like for example, lots that we'll show us a picture in just a minute. He's written a book called The Liberty Amendments. They propose to do things that are currently unconstitutional, make them constitutional, therefore the Constitution won't be violated anymore. It's really a laughable kind of thing. So one of the things they recommend is that, let's do an amendment that says, if money's available, we can spend it as long as there's money. Our current Constitution says you can only spend money for what's allowed in the Constitution. But they want to say if there's money available, go ahead and spend it, okay? Another one says that the executive can legislate and regulate as long as the costs are below a threshold established by the new amendment. What that means is saying, well, if you can keep your regulation under $100 million or under $1 million or whatever number you choose, it's okay. Go for it, guy. Go do what you want. And the problem is, can you see this? If it's $100 million, let's break it into 4 bills or 5 bills, 20 million each, whatever you say, and it'll keep it under $100 million because each one of them is at the $20 million level. And so, okay, next time we need to do that, let's do the same thing, right? It's just absolutely absurd. See, right now, our executive branch can't create legislation. Cannot. They do it. They violate the Constitution. So why aren't they called on the carpet? Because we have cowardly representatives that we put in there. Yeah, sorry, they are, but we put them in there. I know you did, but we need more guys like you.
But
That's
even
what I'm
as
like.
activists and voters, we're not showing up and calling them out where they are in their offices. I know because I've, like, as a full-time hobby, been doing this for 10 years, and I'm usually alone with a few friends, and then even other good conservative activists don't even recognize when they're failing. Oh, but they have to get that through because, and there's so many excuses. There is not a true enforcement or calling them out on actual constitutional principles. So it's not about them not doing their job. It is, but then it's also on us knowing when they're not doing their job, unfortunately, because that's the price of liberties, eternal vigilance.
Eternal vigilance. And we have become a complicit and complacent people. I mean, I'm feeling your pain because I feel it every moment I exist. But here's part of the problem. You have different organizations that they refuse to participate in it because they think they're bending the knee to somehow the beast. I don't know what it is. So they let it happen. There's just all sorts of different attitudes. Some don't do it because they're interested in the bread and circuses. Others don't do it because they don't think it, I'm not gonna capitulate by going in and on bended knee. Well, don't bend your blasted knee. Go in there and use your purposes, huh? Stand up. I'll just give you an example. One of the, and I know, I got plenty more examples than I probably ought to share, but I'll tell you what happened. In one instance, I and a bunch of other people were there to prevent a Constitution Convention from being called. We testified. We argued. We lost. And there another committee's coming in for another hearing after we lost, and everybody in our groups packing up and leaving and everything like that, and I wasn't moving. And one guy that was there said to me, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm staying." He says, "Why?" I said, "Look what's up next." And there was a bill that was going to be discussed. I said, "This is bad. We can't let this happen." He says, "I'm staying with you." So it was him and me. And this was it was bigger than this room, a large committee room. They knew they were going to have a lot of people in favor of it. And anyway, I don't need to get into the argument about it, but the people stand in the aisleways, the hallways, against the walls, everything, And the committee chair says, I know there's a lot of you here today. He says, by show of hands, how many are in favor of this? Every hand went up, but me and my buddy. He says, how many are opposed to it? Me and my buddy. It was like, okay. So they got to pitch their stuff. They took most of the committee hearing to pitch their stuff. Applause, and everybody had to be called to order and blah, 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 blah. And then they said, we'll give each of you, these two guys that are against it, we'll give each of you 3 minutes. Really? How about if I take a half an hour and he takes a half an hour, because that's what you guys took? I didn't say that. I had a little more respect than that, even though I thought it. We got in there and deconstructed what they had said with our 3 minutes each. The bill failed in the committee. It was a foregone conclusion that bill was going to happen, and it was going to be railroaded through and go back to the House with a shall pass recommendation, because two guys sat there and said something that made sense to them somehow. They said, okay. They voted on the committee and they said defeat. We went, yes. We didn't do our victory dance, so we just walked out. You know, it was a little bit more of a saunter than a dance. But at any rate, that's the problem, is that we don't participate. We don't involve ourselves. We don't do these committees that Enoch's talking about. We don't do the things that, okay, I know I've got one more assertion I'm going to do before we close it down. I can't have you guys having to miss your beauty rest, right? Right? No. Anyway, I can kid him and joke him. At any rate, it's just astonishing to me that this concept of eternal vigilance is something we have completely given away. But just in very brief, do you think, and there were other writers besides Paul Revere, and I don't want to get in an argument of how many there were and if one of them was a female and all this kind of stuff, because I think I agree with everything you're going to say anyway. But let's just say take Paul Revere, because everybody's heard about him. Paul Revere, when he went out writing on April 18th, 1775, was not the first time that he had been through those townships and those little villages. And it wasn't, they didn't wake up at night and they say, oh man, somebody spent too much time at the tavern and he's whooping and hollering, he's going home or whatever. No, they knew his voice. They had listened to him in the tavern before, maybe in their church, maybe in their homes. Paul Revere was part of the group that was trying to be the committees of correspondence. They were trying to help inform the colonists. They didn't have the internet in those days. But so, hey, here's what's going on in Virginia. Here's what they're doing down in Georgia. And they shared those pieces of information with the people. And Thomas Jefferson and John Adams corresponded years later after all of this was all said and done. And they were both done with the presidency and became fast friends again. Adams had been asked to write a preface to a book about the Revolution. And he confided in Jefferson. He said, this is what I'm going to tell him. The Revolution didn't happen. The war had nothing to do other than an incidental incident along with the Revolution. The war was a result of the Revolution, which happened from 1760 to 1775. That 15-year period, the people came to love liberty to the point that they would die for it. And then we had the shooting. Blood was spilled on Lexington and Concord, and we went forward. But the people had already made the decision, we're going to be free. That's where we need to come today. We need Paul Reveres that are spreading the word, that can say, you know what, here's a valid concern that we've got, and here's why, and help get your fellow citizens awakened and aroused to this situation. I know Utah overcomes this all the time. They threw away the caucus system, basically. They got Spencer Cox that's going to be on the ballot just because now. And you've got John Curtis that's going to be on the ballot just because now. Because you can get signatures that you can buy through enough press and advertising. But the representatives of the people from the caucuses that are representatives of the people that have been trusted by their neighbors to vet the candidates and then make decisions based upon an analysis, Utah's overcome that. I'm as mad as you are about that. Okay, but that's what we're doing to ourselves because we don't stay engaged. Well, anyway, so that's what it's going to take. More friends, and I'm hoping that we can make this go forward. Okay, so a lot of people say it's necessary to change the Constitution. Whoops, I went backwards. It's things such as the ballooning deficit, the regulations created by the general government or the executive, the stuff that they ruin our Bill of Rights with. There's 25,000 plus laws against the Second Amendment in spite of it says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. All of these things are bandied about that say they require the Constitution to be changed. And Washington will remind you from the beginning, said that the Constitution, which at any time exists till changed by an explicit and authentic act of the whole people, is sacredly obligatory upon all. The duty of every individual has to obey the established government. Steadily discountenance irregular oppositions to its acknowledged authority, resist with care the spirit of innovation, however the specious the pretext, and then they say what may sound like a good idea can impair the energy and cause it to be overthrown. He says if it's wrong, let it be corrected by an amendment, which they've never done. I mean, well, maybe some of the amendments were important and appropriate, but very few of them have been in recent century and a half. He says if you do it the other way, it's a customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. Okay, so the real problem is that the Constitution is being violated. People that want to do this say they're violating the Constitution, so we've got to change it. No, that violates all logic, reason, and intelligence. It's not the Constitution, it's our representatives. And the people have stopped abiding by it. So the solution's not to change it, but return to it. Everybody has to take an oath of office to be able to hold office. And well, maybe if you're interested sometime, we'll do a review of oaths of office. I've made lots of presentations of those to different organizations, including military ones, about legal, lawful orders. And honestly, military does not have to obey illegal and unlawful orders that violate the Constitution. Changing it's not going to make it better. And the problem is that those that are manipulating it have going to be the ones that are current politicians. Here's an example. We've talked about Mark Levin's book, The Liberty Amendments. Someday, if you're interested, we can do a deconstruction of that and show why it will not work. Think if we had a convention today, and then we'll end with this. Who's going to be there? And I put up a few in the collage. Everybody from Klaus Schwab, as you can see right next to the little fellow thinking, to Bill Gates. I mean, you know, pick your poison. I've got people you may like in there, but I guarantee that none of these are going to be there. What we're going to do is we're going to pick up the usual suspects, round up the usual suspects, people we vote into office all the time. The question is, are you willing to take such a risk? So anyway, let's end now. It's about 9 p.m. Mountain Time for those of you that are out of the area. And we'll maybe talk later. Enoch and I will talk about what might be presented in some of these other things. But maybe next time, just a second, maybe next time we'll do Articles 6 and 7 if you want, or we can do something else. So you tell me.
Okay, yeah, we'll discuss that and figure that out. I think in the interest of time, if you guys want to keep chatting a little bit afterwards, then you know we can keep having some discussions. But you can stay here if you have any comments on what I'm saying, Scott, if you want, just for a minute.
She had a question though too, I'm sure.
Yeah. Okay. Was it okay? Go ahead and ask your question, I guess, if we want to do that. Okay. Well, we're using the building that they're donating to us. That's not our thing, right? Okay, yeah. After we end the broadcast, then that's fine. Yeah. Okay. So just a couple thoughts that I had. So we the people, we have a common enemy, and you can call it communism, you can call it globalism, you can call it whatever is and the antithesis of our Constitution. And they have a proven strategy that they use a lot of divide and conquer on so many levels. And I love, and I know this is a controversial issue out there, but I love the founders had this other philosophy that I think is kind of the answer to divide and conquer, which is loyal opposition. And during the debates of the Constitutional Convention, they were heated, they were debated, and people often point to, well, the founders didn't even agree on everything, right? They argued with each other, they had different opinions. Sure, And that was one of the best parts of it, those different opinions. The concept of loyal opposition is that everyone was loyal to the same end. Okay, they all wanted the liberty of the people. And why do they debate those details? Is because, well, if you're a little bit off or you're a little bit off, we want to figure out why any of us are a little bit off, because then, because we love the same thing, we can then better get to the same end. Any good businessman will tell you, you run a business and surround yourself with people that just say yes to you, right? That's detrimental to your business. But you have, various opinions. And I think that's how we kind of beat that divide and conquer game. And so I think, so right now, we underestimate the power that we have as a people if we're armed with the right education. I've been giving this presentation to wherever people will invite me to give it. It's called The Opportunity for Small Towns to Lead the Way. And what I'm doing is I'm going to these generally rural, small, conservative areas where they're saying, hey, the state is doing all this stuff to us. They're making us have high density. They're forcing water meters on our citizens, right? And we can't do anything because they passed the law. Our hands are tied. Local representatives say, hey, forget your congressmen and these people we see on TV that we know are far gone. There are local people who got into office, who knows how they got there. Their friend told them they were interested in one issue, but they haven't studied the Constitution any more than the rest of us. And, or, not in the depth that we need to, which is why we do this class. I have found in these areas, as I teach the principles of the power they have, they can say no to the governor. What? But that's illegal. And then our lawyers, and then, no. They don't know the power that they have. These little guys, little to medium towns, even big towns. I gave this presentation to Orem, and they've been standing up and not allowing high density. They have a good conservative mayor. I don't know him very personally, but right now there's a lot of him being on record fighting the state. I don't know how long that'll last when they have a new city council. I know before it wasn't so good, but cities turn over. So I've been giving this presentation because local is where we win the Constitution in these small areas. Small towns can lead the way. There are small towns that are totally just, they think they are still living free because tyranny hasn't really come to these little areas yet, at least not in any significant way. And they don't feel it as much, but they have an opportunity to set legal precedent that we will not enforce water meters in this town. Well, no one's making you right now. Well, they might, and they're going to, but you can set an example for other towns and that sort of thing. But what that really is nullification. Okay, we have these checks and balances, and so there's a whole training we have on this on our website. And so if you go to defendingutah.org/solutions part 1, and then we have solutions part 2, this is like a whole in-depth training on all that. And then that's when this book comes into play, just briefly. So the idea is to really understand the problem that we're facing and how we're losing our Constitution. And we outline really well how they've created these shadow governments called regional governments, and that's how they sort of pseudo-legislate, and then they pass things to the back door to cities. Little guys in little towns were told when they got in office, oh, this is how things work. You have a city manager. Oh, he's been here a long time. He knows things. And so they just go, okay, and they rubber stamp because no one tells them any different. Even if they don't like something, they don't know their power. And so this book is about how you organize kind of civil entities to either nullify in your community or help your local towns nullify. And okay, so anyway, I would love to continue to give this presentation everywhere I can. And so that's kind of one of the things as an organization that we're doing at Defending Utah. And we also have our national organization is this, the American Committees Association. And the whole point is to learn how we enforce the Constitution as a people. And that we can't follow this program until we have Scott's knowledge. Because people will come to us and say, well, you know, we have to let this happen because this, or they'll give you all kinds of excuses. And if you don't know how the Constitution doesn't allow that, people go along with it. So pushback, and especially organized pushback, does miracles. And in our Solutions Part 1, I show some examples of that. I have some videos and some things that we organized that were kind of like beta tests of applying these principles. Okay, I guess that's all kind of